So, dear participants, dear teachers, thank you for being with us today for the 2021 edition of the Summer School Studies in Sufism, organized by Perennia Verba Association in collaboration with Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society UK and Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society Latina and the Officina di Studi Medievali in Palermo. I will start thanking all the professors who have accepted our invitation to participate to this initiative. And some of them are longtime friends of the summer school, others participate for the first time, and I hope they all will enjoy this occasion of learning and exchange. I also want to thank all the students who massively subscribed to the summer school, manifesting how the interest for Sufism is strongly alive, even more in these troubled days. I want also to thank Paolo Rizzi, who is the main promoter of this initiative and who put all his efforts to make it real. I would also thank Federico Salvaggio, who could not be, who is with us today, but I thought he could not be with us today, for his tireless help in organizing this summer school. Then I would leave the stage to Paolo for a more formal introduction to the summer school.
Okay, thanks, Michele. Many traditions tell us that the age in which we live and we find ourselves is a dark age. The one in the collection of prophetic sayings is defined as the age of tribulation. All this has happened because man has continued to move farther and farther away from the immutable center of existence. We don't think that at this stage a return to normalcy is possible for the whole of humanity. But individually, we are all called to know the true nature of the human being and the place he occupies in the universe. It is with this intent that we have set up our summer school studies in Sufism, now in its 5th edition. And the positive feedback received so far encourages us to carry on with this effort with the hope that our students will continue to benefit from it. This year's theme is a particularly central one, Al-Insan al-Kamil, the universal man, which from Ibn Arabi onward is the ultimate goal of all spiritual search. In fact, it is the ultimate goal of existence. Its very raison d'etre. Obviously, we are not talking about man in the ordinary sense, but we will see this better during the following days with the help of our teachers and friends, who have kindly accepted the invitation to participate to our present edition and make the fruits of their research available to all of us. I am therefore very pleased to thank them at the beginning of this new edition and to welcome them together with all our students. Last and not least, a very special thanks to the two MIAS, Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society, UK and Latina, that this year have honored us by being co-organizers of the present edition. And of course, I thank the Officina of Studi Medievali, who has accompanied us from the very beginning of these studies. And now I give the floor to Dr. Petrone so that he can introduce us to our first sessions and first speaker. Thanks.
Thank you, Paolo. And before starting with the first session, I have some very practical remarks. Lessons will last from 35, 45 minutes to 1 hour, or also 1 hour and a half. It depends on the teacher and is the personal choice. It is preferable deferring questions for the Q&A time, unless teachers will tell you to do otherwise. So please save your questions for later. Questions may be asked in video or in text chat. In this last case, I will take care to read them for you. The overall time of each session is 2 hours, lesson plus Q&A, that normally will not be exceeded. For any other inquiry, you have our email address, Studies in Sufism, and you can contact us also during sessions if you are having troubles with connections and whatever. Lessons will be recorded for archiving purposes only, and we are not planning to share the recordings with anyone at the moment. Then it is my pleasure to introduce to you the first speaker for today, who is Professor Alberto Ventura. He is full professor of Islamic Studies at the Università della Calabria in Cosenza. He also had a fundamental role in fostering scholarship on Islam and Sufism at universities of Cagliari and of Napoli Orientale. He is the author of some fundamental studies for the building of an academic awareness of the profoundness of the doctrinal aspects of Sufism. His most famous work, at least in Italy, is L'Esoterismo Islamico, recently republished by Adelphi. Of paramount importance are his works on Ahmed Sirindi, a letter of Sheikh Ahmed Sirindi in defense of the Wahdat al-Wujud, for instance, and more recently on the relation between yoga and Sufism. The text is called Lo Yoga dell'Islam. So Professor Ventura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michele, for your kind words. And I wish to express my thanks to the organizers of this summer school and to all you participants, and a special mention to my friend Paolo, who so kindly invited me to take this inaugural lesson today. This year theme, as you know, is the perfect man, Al-Insan al-Kamil, that, as Paolo said just a few minutes ago, is one of the most important, central, and complex aspects in the whole doctrine of Sufism. In the course of all the lectures to follow, from this afternoon onwards, the school will address this topic with a series of articulate analysis, in which some of the best specialists and most prestigious scholars in the field will guide you through the different conception of the perfect man, the authors who have spoken about it, the many ideas that this doctrine can suggest. While waiting for this year-intense program to unfold, my task will be more modestly to say a few words of very general introduction to the subject. My speech will be not too long, and nothing new, and I'll say nothing new or particularly original, but just a very broad overview of the subject to highlight some basic aspects of the topic that to me will be useful as an introduction, a general introduction to the argument. The best introduction is starting by looking at the Arabic words that give the general title of the series of lectures. Al-Insan al-Kamil, we say, which can be translated as literally as possible as the perfect man. However, as is suggested in the flyer of the summer school, the expression can also be rendered as the perfect human, as the word insan, man, does not refer to a single individual, but to the human species as such. Or again, another possible translation, and Paolo has already hinted at it, is, excuse me, is the universal man, which is, while it is not a strictly literal translation, as we will see, interprets the adjective kamil, perfect, in its perhaps more proper meaning. Well, first of all, it is important to understand what is meant when the adjective perfect is used here. As Michel Chotkiewicz, the late Michel Chotkiewicz, has rightly pointed out, the perfection of the perfect man, the kamal of the insan kamil, is not to be understood in a moral sense, or a generic sense, which would correspond in short to the heroic virtues of the Christian notion of holiness. But here means completeness or completion. So what is meant here is the completeness of sainthood, walaya or wilaya, as this term is conceived by Sufism, that is, as an adaptation to the model of a particular prophet, and especially of the Prophet Muhammad, who is the prototype par excellence of the perfect man. As it is well known, according to Ibn Arabi, who was the first to illustrate this matter in detail and depth, every saint, every wali, receive as an inheritance from a prophet of the past a special form of spiritual constitution, so that we can have saints who manifest a greater similarity or analogy or kinship, so to say, with Abraham or Moses or Jesus and so on up to Muhammad. It is important to note that this inheritance should not be considered as an inspiration of the generic nature, because on the contrary, it represents an extremely concrete and, so to speak, organic link between a saint and this prophet of reference. As once again Chodkiewicz has pointed out, this inheritance is essentially conformity to the particular spiritual type represented by that prophet. But this relationship, the relationship thus established between the saint and this prophetic model, is not a vague patronage and would rather be compared to the transmission of a genetic inheritance, in the word of Chodkiewicz. So the idea to pursue the perfection of the man, the perfect man who is the prophet, and especially the prophet Muhammad, is the idea of following him, is the idea of following the model of this perfect man. The Arabic term, the technical Arabic term is mutaba. Mutaba is follow in the footsteps of this prophet. And this idea is rather frequent in the teaching of the Sufism, especially from Ibn Arabi, who was the first to address the question in detail. Among many other examples, I would like to quote here a text from Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi, whom Michele mentioned before, an Indian Sufi, that says that the idea of becoming a follower, as for Ibn Arabi, and being the heir of a prophet is just not is not just an ideal appeal, but consists in a precise inner conformity with that divine messenger. To give an idea of this kind of precise conformity, Sirhindi explains how this conformity with the prophetic model is articulated in 7 progressive modes of inner development. The first of these modes, which is typical of ordinary Muslims, the common believers, consists in adhering to the formal precepts of the law and behaving according to the example given to us by the Prophet, the Sunnah of the Prophet. But this after having acknowledged with the heart the truths of faith. In theological terms, this is the tasdiq bil qalb. That means the acknowledgement of the truth by the heart. And this is the most perfect level of faith, of iman. But this before having attained spiritual pacification of the soul, the itminan nafs, because this spiritual pacification of the soul is at an higher level than that of the common believers. The second mode of following a prophet consists in following the sayings and deeds of the Prophet Muhammad in the inner form, in order to rectify one's character and eliminate all negative qualities. So it's a more interior mode of following the prophet. The third mode refers specifically to the prophet's particular form of sainthood, the so-called particular sainthood, walayat al-khassa. Walayat al-khassa is the sainthood peculiar to the Prophet Muhammad, that is following him in his various spiritual states, in his ahwal, in his adwaq, in his mawajid, all the spiritual conditions which the Prophet experienced during his lifetime. The fourth mode, characteristic of men well-rooted in science, al-ulama al-rasikhun, to whom the Quran refers, the men well-sound science, represent the inner quality of what in the first mode was only a formal aspect. In the first form, in the first mode, the man was following the surah, the form of the Sharia, of the law. In this case, on the contrary, the man is following the reality, the haqiqah of the Sharia. And this can be achieved only after having completely pacified the soul. So while the first level was obtained without the pacification of the soul, this can only be achieved after the completely pacification of the soul. The fifth modality, which unlike the previous one depends neither on science nor on action, but it is the fruit of an exclusive divine favor, consists in following the perfection of the Prophet, which are those perfection reserved for the major prophet, the Prophet Ulul Azm, with strong determination, and which are also granted, not only of this to these prophets, by it's also granted by divine grace, of course, to some of their heirs and followers. The sixth modality is represented by participation in the nature of beloved, mahbub, beloved by God, of course, mahbubiyya. That was the typical quality of the Prophet. He was the mahbub Allah, the loved by Allah. And this is a gift that can be granted only by pure divine love. The seventh and last mode, finally, is that of following the Prophet in his descent into the world after the ascension to the divine realm, and represents the complete degree. This is really the perfect man. The complete degree that synthesizes all the previous ones, exactly as the whole synthesizes each of its parts. In this supreme condition, Sekhindi says that it is almost improper to speak of a following and of a follower, because there is such a strong similarity between the two that it creates the illusion of identity. And it is at that point, when the similarity, the following, has been so perfect, that the human being can truly be said to be conformed to the perfect man. But these are only the first step of the meanings of the perfect man, because in addition to these, the completeness of the perfect man can also be understood in the sense that a perfect man, he is who is fully aware of the analogy that exists between himself as a human being and the cosmic environment. It is in this sense that the expression al-insan al-kamil can be best translated as the universal man, because the insan kamil is perfect, that is, he is complete in that in his very psychophysical constitution, he represents almost a synthesis, so to say, a summary of the entire universal order. Well, the meaning of, in this meaning, the perfect man, we have a clear example present in almost every tradition, spiritual tradition of the world, to the close analogy that exists between the microcosm and the macrocosm, between the great man who is the word, al-insan al-kabir, the great man, because the word is the great man, and the small word who is the man, al-alam al-saghir. In this sense, every single component of the individual being is, so to speak, a sort of reproduction of the elements that constitute the universal manifestation. Indeed, in a certain sense, one could even say the opposite, for it is the universe itself that is a development of the possibility of the human being. As one famous Persian Sufi, Nuruddin Isfaraini, the master of Al-Dawla Simnani, as this Isfaraini put it, the existence, I'm quoting him, the existence of the human being, Wujud-e Insan, is a copy of the existence of the world, Wujud-e Alam. Rather, the reverse, in fact. From the celestial throne to the earth, there is no particle that is devoid of man. So it's the aspect of man that is the most important, rather than the aspect of universe. Both are linked in the same entity, but it's the being of man that is the real principle of all this process. This question is very frequent in almost all Sufi texts. And this kind of analogy is developed by numerous authors, paralleling the constituent elements of man with the different parts of the world. There are many, many examples of this. But I think that the most comprehensive and most interesting and detailed of this list of analogies is undoubtedly that offered by Abdel Karim al-Jili, that wrote a book named Al-Insan al-Kamil. In the 60th chapter of this book, sort of conclusive chapter, it's not the last chapter, but is the very essence of all the book, that is entitled, as the whole book, Al-Insan al-Kamil, Al-Jili described the precise correspondence between every single part, bodily or subtle, of the human individual and one of the components of the creation. In his inner part, in his batin, in his interior, man is replica of the higher realities. In his outer part, in the sensible part, Zahir, he reproduces the realities of the lower order. Jili goes on a couple of pages in this chapter explaining this kind of analogies. I'll just make some example. The heart of man is analogous to the throne of God, to the Arsh. The individuality, the individual essence of man, the imnia of man, is like the divine chair, the kursi. His breast, his chest, is like the lotus of the limit, the Sidrat al-Muntaha, a sort of limit between the creation and the divine domain. His intellect is the kalamus, al-kalam, the instrument by which God writes down the destinies of all creatures, of all the worlds. The receptivity of man, the qabiliyah of man, is like the universal substance, the hayula. His bodily constitution is like the dust, al-haba, in which the world is molded. And so on for all the mental or bodily faculties of man, each of which corresponds to one of the cosmic heavens, from the Empyrean to the heaven of the moon. And then again to one of the physical elements, the water, the air, the fire, the earth, and again to the seas, the lands, the animals. It is for this reason that, as Al-Jili says, the perfect man is the pole, is the qutb, around which all spheres of existence revolve, from the first to the last. But he is unique from the beginning to the end of all ends. His name is certainly Muhammad. His surname is Abul Qasim, and Al-Jili says all the names of the Prophet Muhammad. but he could take on various, so to say, clothes, libas, and various names, depending on the period in which he has manifested himself, while remaining essentially one in his most intimate reality. It is above all Ibn Arabi who shows us the profound reason why the perfect man is a complete synthesis of the universal reality. In fact, the Insan Kamil, the perfect man, is even more than a synthesis of universal manifestation, because he can even be considered as a synthetic expression of divine reality itself. To me, no one has managed to highlight this supreme quality of the perfect man better than Ibn Arabi, and especially in his book Fusus al-Hikam. At the beginning of the first chapter, the chapter devoted to the reality of Adam, the verb of Adam, he tells us that God, al-Haq, the truth, wanted to see the essences of his names, that is, of the infinite aspects of him. And Ibn Arabi adds that in so doing, he wanted to see himself. To see the names for God is to see himself. He wanted to see his names reflected in a kaun, in an entity, in a being that could manifest to him his own secret. God is a secret because it's completely hidden in himself, but he wants to reveal his secret. And so to this end, he gave birth to the world to serve as a mirror. But like the mirror of this world, in order to reflect, a mirror must be polished. And for this reason, God appointed the perfect man, who is Adam, as his deputy, his Khalifa, his Caliph. Because man is the being whose purity and transparency guarantee the most perfect of reflection. So through the word, and particularly through the reflection of man, God can see himself. But later in the same chapter, in the same first chapter of the Fusus al-Hikam, Ibn Arabi explains the most profound meanings of the perfect man. You must know, he says, that God, al-Haq, has ascribed to himself, I'm quoting the translation of the text, has ascribed to himself the qualities of the inner, of the batin, of the inner aspect, and the outer aspect, zahir, and has brought into being the universe as the unmanifested world and the manifested world, so that we may perceive the inner through that which is unmanifested in us, and the outer through that which is manifest in us. The fact that every being has a manifest and an unmanifest aspect is very important in the doctrine of Sufism, not only for the question of the perfect man, but also for the spiritual realization. God has also attributed to himself, in the Quran, satisfaction and anger. And the universe he has brought into being is endowed with fear and hope, in the sense that it fears his anger and hopes for his pleasure. He also has qualified himself as beautiful and as the keeper of majesty, Dhul Jalal, the Jamil and the Dhul Jalal, bringing into being in us fear and intimacy. It is the question of the double aspects of God. One is beautiful and one is severe, one is majestic. And so on, for all that he has related to himself and to the names he has assigned to himself. Ibn Arabi adds that these dual qualities are referred in the Quran by the expression the two hands, which God extended, opened in the creation of the perfect man. And Ibn Arabi uses, for one of the first time in the history of Sufism, in a text, the expression al-insan al-kamil, used repeatedly in this chapter. And this insan kamil is kamil, is perfect, in as much as he encloses within himself the universal and the individual realities of the world, the upper and lower realities of the world. Thus, the word represents the manifest aspect, while on the other hand, the man deputy, the insan khalifa, is the unmanifest aspect. This question of the perfect man as the invisible caliph will be discussed this afternoon, just this afternoon by Gregory Van Dam. And it is for this reason that the sovereign has veiled himself. For God has attributed to himself veils of darkness, which are the natural bodies, and of light, which are the subtle spirits. Ibn Arabi continues, God, with his two hands, has thus effected this synthesis in Adam, only to ennoble him. And it is for this reason that he said to Iblis, to the devil, what has prevented you from prostrating yourself before that which I have created with my two hands? Meaning precisely that synthesis between two forms, the form of the Word and the form of God. The question of the form of God, the Surat Allah, is another very central questions in Ibn Arabi's and later Sufi doctrines. In this sort of reunion, Jama, assembly of the two forms, the form of the Word and the form of God, lies the real secret of the perfect man. Because it is only in this synthesis of the two forms that any possible duality is overcome. The two forms are not two different entities, or rather, in a certain part of the spiritual journey, they appear as two different qualities, but at the summit of the spiritual journey, the duality is abolished. And so the synthesis of the perfect man is the synthesis of the total reality, the total states of being, and even beyond the being itself. The scholar Sachiko Murata, many years ago, regarding this text of Ibn Arabi, reported a very interesting comment by MIAS-Latina al-Jandi, a Persian commentator of the book Fusus al-Hikam. Al-Jandi, in this comment, explained that the union of the two forms, the forms of the world and the forms of Allah, is the absolute reality. But this absoluteness is not to be understood as correlative to limitation, as if between the absolute and the limited, between the mutlaq and the muqayyad, there could be any form of opposition. This absolutely is not like this. And many Sufi texts after Ibn Arabi have this sentence, almost a formal sentence. They say, he is absolute even from the absoluteness, if we intend the absoluteness in the sense relative to the limit. In his essential synthesis, the perfect man, who was created by the two hands of God, is beyond any conceivable relationship, so that it is impossible to have any conception of him, any rational conception of him. With regard to this synthesis, represented by the perfect man, that the two hands of God have created and then molded, Al-Jandi concludes that there is no possible language, there is no possible judgment, no name, no qualification, but only pure amazement and total dumbness. And so the best that I can do is to take these remarks of Al-Jandi as a kind invitation to end my speech at this point. Thank you.